Yeah, you can just fire them at me and I'll reply. I don't like to look at questions in advance, I'll be honest with you, because I never like to have canned replies.
That is a good strategy. I agree with that.
I find I always do better that way.
All right. Let's see. I believe that we are live right now. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our Friends of Successes. And today I am really happy to have Ben Greenfield here. My name is Anna Bjerstam. I'm the wellness pioneer of Six Senses. You know me from before, but very excited. I've been a fan of Ben for quite some years. I've read a couple of his books, and he said himself that he's been a complete nerd. I'm not sure if that's is in a past tense or maybe still is, because he's kind of a
probably both.
Probably, yeah. Superhuman. When he was young, president of chess club, played violin for lots of years, and wrote fantasy fiction, which I love to read, at least. Graduated at 15, began college at 16, went through that, was accepted into 6 medical schools, but instead he did a master's degree in exercise physiology and biomechanics. So he's kind of built an empire in the fitness industry. He's a biohacker, he's an author, he's a speaker, and he's done some pretty cool things. And more than anything, he's also done a lot of triathletes, about 120 races and 12 Ironman triathlons. I don't know how your body could, I mean, I've actually read your book, Beyond Training, and I know your view on how a body can survive that impact. But I could go on talking about Ben forever. But just let's say that he's a genius and he's a nerd and he is built an empire with fitness and has all the degrees that one can think of. So welcome, Ben.
You're too kind. Wow. I don't know if I'd say genius as much. Maybe I'm an idiot savant when it comes to all things health. That's maybe about as far as I'd take that. But thanks for the intro. I'm excited to field some questions here.
Yeah,
and just so you guys know, I'm just outside of my house. I have a little walking loop that I carved in with a tractor outside my house, and I'm always a fan of being outdoors in the fresh air when possible. I kind of have this rule that I don't sit unless I absolutely have to.
That's a really good rule, actually. Sitting is what they say the new smoking, isn't it?
Now, being in any one position for an extended period of time, including standing or anything else, is actually something that can result in a lot of stiff joints and varicose veins and things like that. So really, almost like exercise, for weight loss, really the best workout is whatever workout you're not doing right now, because you constantly want to keep the body guessing from a metabolic standpoint. And the best working position to be in is whatever position you're not in right now. So I'm constantly shifting from walking outdoors to walking indoors to kneeling to lunging to standing. But I have to admit, I rarely sit. And one of the reasons for that is not only does it downregulate the metabolic rate, but it shortens your hip flexors. And when you do that, that turns off your butt and decompresses your spine if you are sitting in a traditional chair. So when I do sit, I have something called a saddle chair. And there's a lot of companies that make these chairs that are kind of more shaped like your pelvis. They look like a saddle, and they allow you to sit with really good posture, and it prevents your hip flexors from shortening quite as much. You actually stay in a really biomechanically favorable position. So that's the type of chair I have in my office is called a saddle chair.
Yeah, because how else would you write your books? Or do you talk in your books, or how do you write?
Oh, well, I do a lot of writing while I'm standing. I also do I use the Dragon dictation software, and that's pretty accurate and allows me to even write, while I'm walking on an indoor treadmill, with my computer in front of me, like a desk treadmill. And yeah, I mean, I sit when I eat. I sit when I'm on airplanes, obviously, but pretty few scenarios when I'm actually just sitting in a traditional seated position, which is kind of that started in the Victorian era, when people would sit in these uncomfortable 90-degree angle chairs. But up until that time, humankind largely sat on cushions, sat on the ground, kneeled, was in a lunging or a kneeling position, or even some of the Greek universities, for example, they did a lot of their lectures with the students while walking, because walking actually increases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which causes your brain to grow and absorb information better. So even if you're listening to a podcast or an audiobook or something like that, it turns out that moving while you're doing so can really enhance the learning process.
No, I agree. And I love, I mean, I do so many walking meetings, and it's the only way to live actually. Otherwise, especially these times. How has your life changed during these times, the past couple of months?
Well, I up until 80 days ago or so, I was on an airplane twice a week, and, living half my life at home and half my life out of hotel rooms. And so that certainly changed quite a bit, a lot more time at home. I do health consulting with people from all over the world, and so have just been doing, I would say, a lot more consulting, a lot more phone calls with people, a lot more Zoom meetings like this, a ton more writing. I just finished a cookbook, and now I'm working on a book on spiritual fitness. And
Oh, what's that?
so yeah, just doing a lot more writing, a lot more content production, a lot more time with the family. Have, of course, as a result of all the questions I've been getting about immunity, been studying up a lot on, the immune system, and feel like I've had to transform myself into a bit of a virologist over the past few months from that
So what are your
respect.
tips for immunity?
I have to be somewhat careful. I'm not a doctor. Don't misconstrue any of this as medical advice, but a few of the main things, although I always care for my body, I haven't dropped any of my foundational principles for immunity, and I have a whole chapter on immune. I think it's chapter 15 of my new book, but some of the non-negotiables for me that I was doing to keep myself healthy with lots of travel, even before this COVID pandemic, is first of all, real focus on the lymph system and moving lymph fluid throughout the body, because your blood has the heart that helps to move blood throughout the body, but the lymph fluid does not have a heart, and so you must move it typically using gravity or G forces. So in the morning, usually I'll jump up and down on a mini trampoline, or if I'm traveling and I'm in a hotel room, I'll do kind of like the Tai Chi full body shaking, and also a lot of foam rolling, and typically a massage once a week. So I'm always moving the lymph throughout the body. Even on airplanes, I'll go to the back of the airplane and stand and kind of shake the body. And if I feel like my lymph fluid is becoming stagnant, so that's one thing. Another thing is, anytime I'm in a crowded place like airport or an airplane or a subway station, or exposed to a lot of people, I typically have one of two things on hand that I put into my mouth as a spray or as a dropper for airborne pollutants, and those two things are oil of oregano or bee propolis spray. Okay, so those two are pretty good for airborne assailants, so to speak. And then kind of like daily staples, I usually have a big cup of chaga tea every day. Chaga mushroom extract is fantastic for the immune system. And I also work in quite a bit of thieves essential oil. I use that to clean my home, typically in a spray bottle with some alcohol solution or some lemon juice. And I also diffuse this thieves essential oil in an essential oil diffuser. When I travel, I'll sprinkle some in the hotel bed, but that's kind of like my Swiss Army knife for immunity. I can even, brush my teeth with it in a pinch. And thieves is fantastic. It's a blend of like clove and cinnamon and a lot of plant extracts that have been shown to have pretty good antiviral and antibacterial properties. And then the other thing that I think tends to get underplayed is fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut and kefirs and yogurts. And your immune system largely resides in your gut, so the more that you can with real food support a healthy gut biome, the better. And so I'll use a lot of those things to really help support the lining of my gut. And so these are all things I was doing anyways. And get sick, I get sick maybe once every 4 or 5 years or so with that type of protocol. But then when COVID hit, I threw in a couple of other things. I bought an ozone generator and began to use ozone on a daily basis. Just make myself a big glass of ozonated water in the morning. And ozone is just wonderful for a host of different issues. It's again, kind of like a Swiss Army knife.
If you drink it, don't put it inside the body, like rectally or something.
Well, I'll also, now that you brought it up, I will
That's what
sometimes
I
do
do.
I'll sometimes do rectal insufflation with the ozone. My wife does vaginal insufflation, which is also really good for UTIs or any type of yeast issues in the female reproductive system. And then if you do feel like a cold coming on, you can also do ear insufflation
Yeah.
or nasal insufflation. So that's one thing I started using a lot of was ozone. And then the other thing that I really stepped up was my vitamin C intake. I started to do typically 2 bowel tolerance, 3 times a day, somewhere in the range of 2 to 8 grams of
Wow.
really good vitamin C. And, vitamin C is not something that you have to do for life in those amounts because it is a pretty potent antioxidant. And arguably, if you're just constantly consuming antioxidants, you can kind of blunt some of your body's own ability to make its own antioxidants. And also you can blunt a little bit of the body's response to exercise. So the high dose vitamin C is not something that you want to do, all the time. But when you're in a period where that you've got something like a virus going around, it's a pretty smart idea. So really, those are the two main things I added in were the ozone and the vitamin C. And then the other thing that I've been doing a lot of, just because I've been at home a lot, and I just wrote a big article about this on my website about kind of the protocol that I used for this, but a lot of breath work combined with sauna, combined with cold. So I get in the sauna every night with my twin boys, and we typically do a 20 to 30-minute breath work routine, and then finish with a dip into a cold pool, because heat, cold, and breath work are all fantastic for the nervous system, for anxiety, for stress, for detoxification, and also for immunity. And so I wound up kind of sacrificing the length of workouts that I would normally do to make time for that. And instead would just do kind of quick, 15, 20-minute workouts, and then grab my boys and we'd all go in the sauna and do breath work
Beautiful.
and
I mean,
cold
I'm from
together.
Sweden, so we do a lot of sauna and cold dips. So that's what we do here.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you said about fermentation, because right now, I guess in almost every Six Senses, we are doing a fermentation lab and do a huge amount of fermentation all around. And we were supposed to have been in Turkey, in Kaplankaya, later this year, and it's looking pretty maybe not possible, but we will get back to that. Now, you said you were writing a book about spiritual fitness, and what is that? How do you define it?
Well, largely spiritual fitness comes down to the spiritual disciplines, right? So we could look at mental disciplines, like making an effort to constantly learn new things, to read books that might be outside of your comfort zone, or to, maybe listen to a podcast during a workout at 2 times speed, or learn a musical instrument. These are all ways that we can discipline the brain. And when it comes to physical disciplines, of course, we know about things like strength and power and endurance and mobility and all these ways we can train the body. And then traditionally, there are also spiritual disciplines like fasting and meditation and gratitude and development of a strong purpose statement, and relationships with others, service in the community, all these things that really care for and train what I would argue is probably the most important part of each and every one of us, our spirit, our soul, the one single part of us that will go on and, in my belief, to just be around forever. And so if there's one thing you really want to optimize for true happiness and fulfillment, it would be your spirit. And so I'm writing a book that's just focused on a lot of my own practices and how I weave those into my routine, living in a modern world, and how one can do things like really clearly identify their purpose statement, weave a daily gratitude practice into their life, engage in more meaningful and deep relationships with others. And really the book is something that I've wanted to write for a while, and that I have bits and pieces of in Boundless, but this book is just going to really be hardcore focused on spiritual fitness, so to speak, and the spiritual disciplines particularly.
That's awesome. I love that. And I work, my side hobby is being a shaman. So that's
amazing.
So I love that. But me being also a fantasy nerd, what's your best fantasy book
That I've written?
Yeah, wait, the one you read or the one you've written?
The one that I've written would be called The Forest, and it's inspired by my twin boys, who are the protagonists in the story, who cross through a portal into an other world that which they fight some wingless dragons and a villain called Cole, and it's based around the elements. They have powers over water and earth, and they have a couple princesses who they meet in the story who have powers over fire and air, and they combine their forces together to use the elements to defeat evil. Spoiler alert. And then I'm working on the sequel to that called The Ocean, which all takes place in a water world, and then I'll have a snow world after that and a desert world after that. And my boys kind of want the final book in the series to be a space world. So anyways, that's what I work on the side, is that fiction. But that book that you can get now on Amazon is called The Forest. And then, not to be boring, but I still really love the work of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. They're at the top of my list. The Chronicles of Narnia and the entire Lord of the Rings series. And then also one that kind of is lesser known by C.S. Lewis, but that I think is a really, really good kind of space-based fantasy fiction, is his space trilogy. And C.S. Lewis's space trilogy is really good. So yeah, that's one to add to the list.
Different subject. And I mean, you've done some pretty out there stuff for men's health. And so I have to ask you this: which one was the most beneficial for yours and your wife's sex life? And tell us a little bit what you did for men's health.
Yeah, that magazine, Men's Health, they hired me to kind of do almost like a 5-month immersive journalist story and experience on everything that a man could do to optimize sexual performance, libido, and testosterone, including ancestral or Eastern tactics like tantric sex breath work or reduced ejaculation frequency, all the way up to these modern biohacks like stem cells injected into the penis, and my wife had them injected into her clitoris, and acoustic sound wave therapy to kind of break up old blood vessels in the penis or in the vagina and introduce the formation of new blood vessels, using different supplements, experimenting with different over-the-counter supplements that are often sold as libido enhancers. And I have to say, although it's pretty fringe, probably the most noticeable thing that I did was I was at a clinic in Utah and underwent what's called a full body stem cell protocol, where they put me under anesthesia and then extracted my own stem cells from my hip bones to produce what's called like a bone marrow aspirate, which is kind of like a stem cell soup. And then they combine that with something called exosomes, which are these little cell signaling molecules that allow the stem cells to just travel everywhere throughout the body. And then they pretty much injected me head to toe in every joint with the stem cell exosome combination, including 3 injections into my penis. And they did platelet-rich plasma treatment on the face, and kind of like a full body overhaul. And pretty extreme. But I would say that one I noticed quite a bit in terms of the effects on recovery, on libido, on sexual performance, etc. But I'd say probably something that might be a little less intensive for people and doable would be this acoustic sound wave therapy. And they even now sell home devices for this that men or women can use. And it's based similar to the concept of ultrasound. It originated from doctors who were breaking up kidney stones using a specific waveform of ultrasound, and finding that it also worked really well for breaking up old blood vessels and allowing for the formation of new blood vessels. There's one clinic in the US called Gainswave, and there's, I think, several dozen locations across the US where you can go in and have this procedure done. It's about a 20-minute procedure. And, you put on a numbing cream and they just kind of do this ultrasound treatment on your genitals. And my wife and I have both done that. And that's, it's faster. It's not super expensive. And the results pretty much kick in within 5 hours after doing the procedure. And now there's a home device. It's called the Phoenix, that allows you to do the same thing just from the comfort of your own home.
I think everyone is writing that down, and that's interesting with exosomes. I do exosomes every quarter, but
Yeah.
that's really now from that to something completely different. What, because we're almost winding up here, so but we have a couple more questions. And what is your recommendation for those that want to increase brain capacity as well as making it more resilient? Because I think that's something that suffered the most the last couple of months for people.
Yeah, I would say probably the two most important things to be aware of are the integrity of the blood-brain barrier and also the production of neurotransmitters. For the former, the integrity of the blood-brain barrier, there are certain things that can improve that. Beverages that are rich in polyphenols and flavonols, like regular intake of organic coffees and teas. I think there's a reason we see a lot of the blue zones, where people are living a disproportionately long period of time, weaving those type of compounds into their diet. They seem to have pretty good cognitive capacity too in old age. And then magnesium is also very protective of that barrier. So supplementing with magnesium, for example, before you go to bed at night. And probably one of the best ways, surprisingly, is getting the face underneath icy cold water. So doing like cold showers, cold dunks, jumping into cold rivers or lakes or pools where your head goes underwater, doing like a Wim Hof cold thermogenesis type of protocol. That's fantastic for that blood-brain barrier. And the two things that damage it the most would be poor sleep and alcohol intake. So you'd want to be careful with both of those. And then for neurotransmitters, really there's just a few key things. The way that they communicate throughout the body is they're going to propagate a signal over these things called myelin sheaths. And those are primarily comprised of oleic acid and DHA. And you're going to find oleic acid in a lot of Mediterranean fats, particularly as the name implies, olive oil, and avocado oil is pretty high in it too. And then DHA, you're going to find a lot of, cold water fish. I personally eat kind of a smash diet, which stands for sardines, mackerels, anchovies, salmon, and herring. I do a lot of those type of fish rich in DHA. And on the days that I don't, I supplement with about 10 grams of a good fish oil that has DHA in it. And for vegans, you can use algae, sources of DHA like chlorella or spirulina. And then the neurotransmitters also, to form them, you need to have adequate levels of amino acids and adequate levels of vitamin B. And for the latter, supplementation with a really good multivitamin that has a full vitamin B complex, especially if you're eating a plant-based diet, because you'll get most of your vitamin B normally from animal sources. And then also the other one, the amino acids, I like to supplement with essential amino acids, which really just give you gasoline for your neurotransmitters. And then when I eat protein like steak or fish or eat plant-based protein or anything like that, I always consume digestive enzymes along with it. So those proteins are broken into their amino acids more completely and can allow for more precursors for the neurotransmitters. So those would be the two biggies, would be the blood-brain barrier and the neurotransmitters. I mean, it's so important. So the first two chapters of my book are just all based around that, just because, I don't want people going through the rest of the book with broken brains. And so I start with just kind of how to fix some of those issues.
Right. And looking at plant-based diets really becoming in fashion now that everyone is going plant-based. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a pretty big can of worms, but long story short is that plant-based diets, a lot of people feel really good on initially because you're eliminating a lot of common toxins and ultra-processed foods if you're shifting to a largely kind of ancestral plant-based diet, not comprised of, packaged and processed, whatever, flax spirulina crackers, but, real recognizable sprouts and shoots and microgreens and things like that. So if that's your approach, then you're going to feel pretty good just because you've eliminated a lot of common food toxins and preservatives. But the problem is long-term, unless you're including enough fatty acids and amino acids in that plant-based diet, it can lead to some deficits that often need to be addressed through supplementation, with things like, algal oil and B12 and creatine and carnosine and taurine and all these things that tend to be deficient in a plant-based diet. And so you do need a hefty amount of supplementation if you're going to fill in all the gaps, so to speak, that you'd normally be getting from eating animal-based foods. And so it's doable. But, for me personally, I say, well, why not have, a little bit of liver here and there, some steak here and there, some fish, some eggs, and kind of fill in those gaps a lot more easy without taking a ton of supplements. And then the other issue is that a lot of plants have built-in defense mechanisms, because unlike animals, they don't have, teeth or claws or hooves. And so to defend themselves, they produce anti-nutrients that can do damage to your gut unless, as part of your plant-based diet, you're doing a lot of soaking and sprouting and fermentation and all these kind of ancient food preparation tactics that deactivate a lot of the built-in plant defense mechanisms. And this would be, for example, when my wife makes bread, she does a slow fermented sourdough bread, and it pre-digests a lot of the gluten and deactivates a lot of the phytic acids in the wheat. So the wheat becomes far more digestible. Or for quinoa, quinoa is covered in a soap-like irritant called saponins. And so it must be rinsed thoroughly and even, left overnight in water and rinsed again, or, even sprouted. You can sprout your quinoa and you essentially render it far more digestible. And so if you're eating a plant-based diet, I would say that you need to make sure you use some supplements to fill in the gaps, and also use a lot of food preparation tactics that deactivate the built-in natural plant defense mechanisms. And then finally, there are some people who are going to feel really good on a plant-based diet, particularly people who do what's called overmethylation, meaning they've got a lot of methyl groups floating around in their body, and excess methionine, particularly from animal foods, can contribute to inflammation. And so, some people genetically respond better to a plant-based diet versus an animal-based diet. So there's some amount of individuality as well.
So I have a question here from an audience and asking, how do you keep, and I'm quite interested in this too, how do you keep your children, your boys, from not eating unhealthy and sugar and all those things that they often they're interested in?
Oh, I don't. There's no rules about sugar consumption, or screen time, or anything in our house. Our approach is we simply, educate our kids about the consequences of any decisions that they might make. So my kids know all about glyphosate and pesticides and herbicides and the impact of sugar on vascular inflammation. And they know all about the importance of healthy fats and proteins. And they can then make their own decision. Like, they know that gluten, even if it doesn't hurt their tummy, can be inflammatory from a neural standpoint and affect their cognitive performance or their sleep that next day. And so, if they go to a birthday party, yeah, sometimes they will have, a cupcake or a slice of cake, but they'll take just a little bit. And sometimes they'll even use like a gluten digesting enzyme or something like that. And they're free to make their own decisions and then deal with the consequences. And so that's part of it. Is I don't set up any forbidden fruit, because I feel like if I tell them no sugar, all they're going to want to do is just like find hidden sources of sugar and sneak them. Whereas if they know that they can buy a bag of Skittles with the money that they made pulling weeds and eat that entire bag of Skittles sitting in front of dad, I don't judge them at all. But I do tell them, sometimes I'll make an offhand comment like, "Oh, you're having your little bag of diabetes now, huh?" And, you just make sure that they're aware of the consequences. And then the other thing, B, is that, you have to set an example. And so, when I'm making lunch and I'm pulling a can of sardines and some seaweed salad and, some bone broth or miso soup out of the fridge and maybe a handful of seeds and nuts, and making myself a wonderful, colorful, tasty lunch every day, they're usually making lunch at the same time. And they're just kind of, watching dad and imitating their parents and grabbing all the same stuff I'm grabbing. And, if I were, throwing down a scone, biscotti, maybe a cup of coffee or a sandwich, that's what they're going to do. And so, A, you educate your kids about the consequences of any decision that they might make, and then let them deal with the consequences. And then B, you set a really good example yourself.
Good parenting. So last question, what is your top biohack tips that you already have not talked about?
Well, I would say if you're already eating healthy and you already have some semblance of an exercise protocol, it all comes down to viewing your body as a battery. And what I mean by that is all your cells operate on a specific electrochemical potential across the cell membrane. And the more you can do to optimize that electrochemical potential, the better, because that's how your mitochondria are going to operate efficiently. That's how you're going to have more ATP. That's how you're going to have more energy. And so the best ways, in my opinion, to do that would be A, get outside barefoot every day, or get in touch with the ground or the surface of the planet every day, because it's chock full of negative ions, which help to restore the proper electrochemical balance in the body. B, get exposure every day to 20 to 30 minutes minimum of photons of sunlight, because photons of sunlight can do the same thing. They can help to charge the voltage of that battery. Number 3 and 4 would be make sure that you're getting lots of exposure to heat, like a regular sauna practice, which is fantastic for, again, charging up the body and also allows for some movement of blood, detoxification, et cetera. I'm a huge fan of having a really regular sauna practice, and similarly, a really regular cold practice, a cold shower at the beginning or the end of the day, or, 5 minutes of cold after that sauna, or whatever the case may be. So you're getting heat and cold in addition to grounding, in addition to sunlight. And then the last 2 things, you got to move these charges throughout the body. And the way you move charges throughout the body are water and minerals. So drinking really good, pure, clean, filtered water, and then adding minerals back to that water in the form of like trace liquid minerals or really good salts, salting your food with wonderful salts like Celtic salt and Kona salt and, Fleur de Sel, and these mineral rich salts that go above and beyond what, say, normal table salt might give you. Those would be the non-negotiables in my opinion. So grounding and earthing, sunlight, heat, cold, water, and minerals. And if you're already kind of exercising and eating a relatively healthy diet, those are going to be things that really put you over the top. And that's what I would consider to be the biohacks, so to speak.
What is the best water filter?
Typically either a really good carbon block or a really good reverse osmosis.
Yeah,
either one's pretty good.
At Six Senses, because we do all our own. So that's what we're. So, well, I mean, this has been super interesting. It's packed with information. I'm not even going to try to summarize it. People simply have to listen to this again to know that we're going to get a lot of views, but it's been such a joy to have you, and thank you. And we really look forward to welcoming you to Six Senses in the future, and then we'll have our program there. I will definitely be there. And
we'll make it happen. I mean, if you get people there, I'm not afraid to travel these days, so I'll come do it.
No, and I mean, just knowing that we've opened in Portugal and in Vietnam and China, and it's going very well. People are there. It's
amazing.
Cool.
Good.
So
yeah, people are going to be craving it after all this, anyways. So
we need travel and touch. So
yep.
Well, thank you.
Right. Cool.
Lovely day,
all right.
We'll be in touch soon.
All right. Have an amazing day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.